Welcome back, my fellow patriots, to the Save Our Republic daily video series. I want to start with a reminder, because I actually received a critique recently about the use of the word patriots. I do have a couple of episodes on this, maybe even 3. And if you believe in the founding first principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, then in my book, you are a patriot. It is not a term of partisanship. It is not a term that should be grabbed by the right or the left. It should be something that is universal, and that regardless of your political perspective, assuming that you believe in the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, then you're a patriot. And that's a broad term, and it should not be co-opted or used as a slur or an epithet one way or the other. It is something that should unite us all. And that's the whole point of this video series. So for those of you that may have your ears perk up and say, oh my gosh, I want to remind you that Patriot Week began well before the most recent events in connection with political events where some people are trying to claim and create a Patriot Party and things like that. This has been around for well over 10 years, and I just wanted to lay that to rest yet again. I don't think anyone should abandon the idea of being a patriot, especially American patriots. If you're in France, if you're in China, if you're in Guatemala and you believe in the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, I consider you an American patriot. We are now going to Amendment 7, which states as follows, and this is of the Bill of Rights in our Constitution. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of a trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall otherwise be reexamined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. Now, when the federal Constitution was adopted, most of the lawsuits that existed were either criminal cases where there was a violation of criminal law, or common law cases, which meant that somebody was wronged by someone else, a civil suit. The government usually isn't involved, and they sue, for example, on a breach of contract or some kind of negligence suit, medical malpractice, slip and fall, those kinds of things. And this provision is providing that if you're in a federal case, that you have the right to a jury at such lawsuits if the amount of controversy was over $20. Back then, that was a fair amount of money. Obviously, today, it is a de minimis amount of money, very small amount of money. The founders didn't think about consumer price indexes and inflation and things like that. They fixed a number, and we have maintained that as a solid number. So if you're in a federal suit, you have the right to a jury in a civil case almost always. And then it says, no fact tried by a jury shall otherwise be reexamined by another court. So I want to explain that briefly. In a lawsuit, there are 2 major components. There's the law and there's the facts. In my courtroom or other courtrooms across the country, the judge determines what the law is and instructs the jury, when there is one, on what the law is, or otherwise holds the parties accountable for the law and the claims and what the claims constitute, and whether or not there's enough evidence to go forward with the jury. That's the role of the judge. The jury determines if there's, assuming the judge says there's enough evidence, and that means viewing the evidence the light most favorable to the plaintiff usually, that the plaintiff, if the jury believes everything that the plaintiff wants the jury to believe and forgets everything else that the defendant wants you to question, is there enough for the case to go to the jury? Assuming that there is, then it's up to the jury to decide the facts, what actually happened pursuant to the law as instructed by the judge. And then no court, this is what the Constitution is saying, no appellate court, and that means Court of Appeals or Supreme Court, can override that decision of the jury. The jury is supreme. It's a hedge against tyranny, and it's an impartial decision maker to ensure justice. And so to stop trial courts and higher courts from subverting that process, the jury's decision about facts is supreme. So even if I disagree with where the jury went, even if a higher court disagrees, says, I wouldn't have gone that way, it doesn't matter. As long as there's enough evidence, viewing the evidence the light most favorable to the party that prevails, that they could prevail, then the jury is supreme and it cannot be reversed. Sometimes you can get a new trial if the evidence is so overwhelming on one side, but it's not like you set aside the jury verdict and give unwind the lawsuit and reverse it. If the judge makes a mistake of law and instructs the jury, that could be another reason, but that's an issue of law, not of fact. So the jury decisions about facts are supreme. That protects justice, fairness, and liberty, as I've discussed earlier about juries being a hedge against tyrannical oppression by the government. And so that's why we have a Seventh Amendment. Until next time, don't forget about America's Survival Guide at americasurvivalguide.com, Patriot Week at patriotweek.org, and the Patriot Lessons American History and Civics podcast, which can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, all the major platforms in connection with podcast. God bless you, and God bless America.